For the month of May, I really wanted to do some really special videos, cover some special topics, do some fun videos. Those will be coming up very soon. The month's not over quite yet, but I really wanted to cover some topics that have a very special place in my musical life. And one of those topics will be covered right now, and that is the legendary, amazing bass player, Danny Thompson. Few musicians in my listening life so far have made such an impression to me as Danny Thompson. He's one of the most unique and original musicians I can think of, that he can play anywhere from a bluegrass piece to a jazz piece to free improvisation to world music to rock and roll. And every time you hear it, you know immediately that's Danny Thompson playing bass. He is unwavering in his unique style and approach, and I think it is just absolutely prolific. The way he plays, the way he approaches music, the way that he performs, all of it is just rock solid, way beyond the majority of bass players on this earth. He is so far ahead of all of that. I simply wanted today to just share my love and admiration for his music and take a look at some of it. And I have a very, 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 very special guest to help me do that. I also hope that this video will introduce Danny Thompson to people that don't know who he is, because I think, oftentimes it's easy to look at the main person, like the leader of the band, but often the sidemen kind of go unnoticed occasionally. So if Danny Thompson is a new name for you, I sure hope by the end of this video you will be intrigued enough to go out and check out some of these recordings we mentioned today. I was really hoping to get the chance to interview and talk with the maestro himself. As I understand, Danny is not in the best of health these days, and I did get a response from his team, which was very gracious of them, but unfortunately he wasn't able to do an interview at that time. But the person I got to do the interview today, I am so honored and humbled and thrilled that Darrell Scott was willing to chat with me today. I first discovered this album. This is one of my favorite recordings ever. It's a live album of Darrell Scott, Danny Thompson, and the great percussionist and drummer Kenny Malone. I wore that album out so much. It's just absolutely terrific. I knew of Darrell Scott. I hadn't listened to a lot of his work, but then when I saw something with Danny Thompson, who I discovered before that, I got this, and then that opened the door to the repertoire of Darrell Scott, and I've been listening ever since. Now we fast forward to last year, came out this incredible record, and this is once again with the amazing contributions of Danny Thompson on the upright bass, and he's playing away on, when you hear the second, here's the back cover, so you can see Darrell Scott, the front cover, The Blues of Hank Williams. The second track is Lost Highway. I think that's one of the greatest pieces of music in history. And Darrell does an incredible rendition of it. But that moment that Danny Thompson comes in, it's like the, I don't know, like a black hole just formed or something. I mean, it's just such a massive explosion of sound and intention and just amazing musicality that I have no idea what to make out of it. It's just so great. So check that track out. And stay tuned, because we're about to get into a wonderful chat with Darrell Scott about all things Danny Thompson. So, I would love to chat with people like yourself who have worked with him so extensively. One of my all-time favorite things in the whole world is the Live in North Carolina album. I love this so much.
Great.
So I was wondering if you could start by talking kind of about the timeline of how you and Danny started working together. I know there was like the transatlantic sessions in there, of course your album. So I just wondered what happened first and how it all came to be.
Right. Well, the very first come to be was I had my first opportunity to see Richard Thompson.
Mm-hmm.
In Nashville, Tennessee. He was playing kind of a black painted black wall rock room kind of thing, but a good sized room, a place called 328 Performance Hall. And I've been a fan of Richard's for a long time. And finally, I love his playing, his singing, his writing. everything about it. And it was like, finally I get to see Richard Thompson. So I go, and he's got at least, well, maybe it's a 4-piece. And so I go there 100% to be seeing, Richard Thompson. And who takes my attention is this guy to his left, and is the bass player. And he's playing it upright. He's playing with more fire and more take no prisoners than pretty much anyone I've ever seen, ever. And also his sound and his attack and his, it was like, Richard who, we're glued to Danny Thompson.
Yeah.
The entire time, just like, I can't believe what I'm seeing and hearing here, especially in light of Richard Thompson, who's just simply one of the best on the planet. But Danny's the one who just like opened a new door for me. And so fly through the months later or whatever. And then me and Tim O'Brien are on the road, and we're talking about a fantasy band for some dates that we have where we need, like a full band. And so we were literally fantasizing, like, who would the band be? And I said, Danny Thompson on bass. And it was like, yeah, that's a good idea. How are we going to get a hold of him? So complete strangers, right? Complete strangers to Danny Thompson. Tim finds his number somehow through management or whatever, and calls Danny at home.
Oh, wow.
And Danny agrees to do these 2 dates we have. One was Dublin at the Hall of Fame, and then the other was Queen's Hall. Let's see, is that right? Yeah, it was in Glasgow, Scotland. I'm sure it was for Celtic Connections. Mm-hmm. And he said yes to both. And so then we had this almost super group put together between Ireland, great Irish musicians, Scottish, English, and a couple of Americans. Well, 3 or 4 Americans. So this super group of across the islands. And we had rehearsals for 2 days. And I just basically fell in love with Danny Thompson. Obviously the playing, but also the dude. And so while we were on the road with that, which was just, 2 dates, we were at a sound check or something. I said, a bass player that I had recorded a lot with and loved has recently passed from Nashville, an upright player. And would he ever be interested in coming over to play, Danny, to record? And he said, oh, absolutely, And that's the kind of casualness that Danny had, even though he's obviously who he is, that austere kind of high up the, the food chain kind of thing that he is. But he's also this total regular bloke. He just is. And that's the guy that I came to know, was the regular bloke, the guy who knows, all that muckety muck of stardom or famous or who he's played with. It just doesn't mean all that much.
Right.
He's just a guy. And so I had him come over for 2 weeks of recording in Nashville. I don't even know when it was, maybe 6 months later, 9 months, whatever. So now we're talking about somewhere around 2000 and 2001 area. So I've known Danny and played with him, I guess, for the last, I've known him for 21, 22 years, something like that.
Sure.
And then once he came to my house, and I do home recordings, meaning we push away the furniture, and in comes a great drummer, Kenny Malone, in comes a great Danny Thompson, in comes Dan Dugmore on pedal steels and electrics. And we record literally in the home, in the living room.
Right.
And my family, my kids just loved him. He stayed with us. He was like the uncle in the the extra room. And then he came back the following year and did another 2 weeks with us in recording. So I wound up with, I want to say 45 tracks with Danny on all of them. And then by that, now we're friends. Now he's family. And, I go over to see him. We meet in Scotland, blah blah blah. Every time he comes over with Richard, he extends his trip, to see us, and my kids love him, and so I find all kinds of ways to try to be with Danny Thompson to this day.
Sure, sure.
But that's how it started, was a fantasy group, and going to see Richard Thompson, and Danny taking all my attention.
This and then so the first was then Theater of the Unheard, right? That's when it all started. Was
That's right. That's
Yeah.
the first release that I made.
Right, right.
Like I said, I recorded 45 songs. Those 45 songs are on Theater of the Unheard, Invisible Man, and then the Couchville Sessions was the final wrap up of those.
Got you. Okay.
Yeah, all three of those were cut at the same time. Those are the same people, those different songs.
Right.
But the first one I knew to put out was Theater of the Unheard. That's correct.
Gotcha. And then fast forward until last year with I love this record so much. So when was this all brand new, like recently recorded, or was that
recently recorded, meaning I don't know, in the last 3 years.
Okay.
So it's been out a year.
Right.
So let's say maybe 2 years ahead of that, I tracked it, and so I sent it over to Danny. So for all those other records, we're all in the same room together.
Sure.
But that record you just held up, the Hank record, had to be done, with him over there in London.
Right.
And so he went to a friend's, home studio, living room style thing, and one afternoon just blazed through that and did what you hear on the Hank record.
Right. Well, Lost Highway is one of my favorite songs in the world, and you do it just incredibly. But when Danny's bass playing comes in, it's like a supernova or something. I mean, it's just like this massive downbeat. It's just unreal how much he just brings with one simple note. It's like the shakes the world.
Yeah, that's a quality of his.
Yeah.
and you have to try, if you were to try to dissect, well, why is it that powerful?
Right.
And there's a lot of reasons for it. One of the biggest one is his intention.
Yes.
When he comes in, he means to come in. And it's like, all things aside, here's the downbeat.
Yeah.
And he's that guy waiting in the bushes for that attack of the downbeat. Right. And that's just the way he is. He does that constantly, he's done that for his entire career.
Yeah,
he really has. I mean, you could show up anywhere in his giant decades of career and find that same attitude. And so he intends to show you where the downbeat is. He intends to be, that's foundational.
Absolutely.
And then there's technical reasons too: his hand, his timing, his shape of note, his length of note, his attack, his equipment. There's all those techie things, but it really starts from his intention.
Yeah.
And he's been that way all along.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, like you mentioned, all those people he's played with, and of course all the different styles. I wondered about first his thoughts, and then approach, if it's any different to approaching American musicians or bluegrass, if I even use that word, or folk. Certainly, it's quite a lot similar to what he was doing. But like I remember seeing the first transatlantic sessions, Mark O'Connor came and played Texas fiddle tunes, and I thought Danny just nailed it, and I thought, man, I wonder if this was something he thought about differently, or if it's just he just had his just him. It just does what he does. So I wondered if if you two got into discussions about his approach to playing styles like that, and with you, of course, too.
Right. I think Danny, he's got huge ears, and he's been open to world music, literally. Right, so if you follow his discography, you see that he's been playing with people around the world. And I don't mean English-speaking places. I mean the Middle East. I mean, the Far East.
Yeah.
I mean French speaking, I mean classical-ish stuff. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
if you've seen his discography, you see like, wait a minute,
Yeah.
there's not too many musicians that can be named who can sit in all of those different musicalities.
Right. Right.
So how does he do it? It's because he's Danny in all of them,
Yeah.
right? That's how he
Right.
does it. And
Right.
he sees that whole musical language
Yeah.
is available to him. So
Yeah.
he doesn't sit around and study bluegrass bass players
Right.
and say,
Right.
oh, okay, now I'm going to sit with Mark O'Connor.
Yeah.
I'll play. He doesn't. He
Right.
doesn't dumb himself down.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, because a
Right.
lot of, and this is a oversimplification, but a lot of players think they're supposed to dumb themselves down to play simple music.
Yeah. Right.
Right. Well, there's a big difference. First of all, he doesn't see it as simple.
Yeah.
And second of all, if you want to trip up a great jazz musician, play a country song.
Right. Right.
Okay. So it's not that the jazz musician doesn't have a vocabulary that's exponential to a country player. It's that they you can trip them up over a Hank Williams song.
Yes.
I've seen it many times.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
so the difference there with Danny is he's simple does not mean simplistic or simpleton. So
Right.
that same intention I was talking about will show up on a Texas fiddle number, or
Right.
it'll show up on a Scottish bagpipe tune,
Yeah.
or a jazz thing, or Richard Thompson rocking the socks off,
Yeah.
or ballads, or
Right.
on and on. So he's bringing that intention through all of it. He doesn't see some of the simplest thing I ever saw him play was with my dad.
Hmm.
My dad musically is one of the most simple things that ever could happen. But Danny loved playing with my dad because he was the real deal.
Sure.
Not that he was famous or anything else, my dad, but that he was authentic.
Right.
Danny responds to authenticity. It
Right.
doesn't mean he doesn't know how to play, because he spent years being in, the band leader of London shows, television shows,
Sure.
where there's a new guest and there's, charts and reading and, kind of under the hot seat. And that's the whole thing. He's there. He's also, with Rod Stewart tracks,
Right.
or Peter Gabriel, or my dad, for God's sake.
Right.
And so how do you function in all those? It's when you don't judge my dad as a lesser musical being than sitting with Engelbert Humperdinck.
Right.
you
Right.
know
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and it's a special person who can do that, because most musicians of his ilk could easily develop prejudice
Yes.
against, well, if it ain't jazz, I don't want anything to do with it, or if it isn't triple scale, I don't want anything to do with it,
Right.
or if you're not what's he call it, Billy Big Fish, then I don't want anything to do with it. He is not that guy.
Right. Right.
He is a regular human being who also happens to be one of the best bass players any of us have ever heard, and want him on our
Right.
record, period.
Yeah. Right.
So he
Right.
doesn't see those distinctions. He brings that same intention in everything he does.
Yeah. Yeah. The two things you said there. First, about the jazz musicians. When I was at Berkeley College of Music, there was jazz guitar players that could just play circles around me. But then when I would play a bluegrass tune, they were asking me to show it to them, and it's like, oh, come on, this is what's so hard about this? Is so easy to do, and they couldn't do it. Just like you said, it was something. The feel of it was just something beyond what they could do, which was really unusual for my perspective. But it's so interesting to hear you say the same thing. And then on Danny, I've noticed exactly what you said, that even when he's playing a fiddle tune, I mean, his syncopations, his offbeats, his walk-ups, they are in there just as much as if he's playing a Charlie Parker tune. I mean, it's like, it's just really And hearing you articulate about him not seeing it as simple or things, that's really, you know, that makes a lot of sense, and like makes the connection now, of hearing that. Yeah,
Yeah, he
it's
doesn't seem to have those walls
right.
of categorization that a lot of musicians have, which is a psychological wall.
Right, right.
And he doesn't have that. I can't overstate,
Sure.
he literally thinks him playing with my dad was one of the greatest things he's ever done.
Hmm.
I mean, how can that be?
Right,
How
right.
can that be? But it was because of the authenticity. We went to my dad's shack in Kentucky
Mm-hmm.
and recorded with my dad in his kitchen.
Sure.
That's the stuff that Danny is impressed by more than Albert Hall
Yeah.
and four packed out houses for 4 nights in a row.
Right.
You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
that's the Danny Thompson that I know and love.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Can you say what he was like with rehearsals? Did he make like arrangement suggestions, or just typically leave it up to the leader? You know, would he make changes, or just did his thing? And
You know, I've seen him in a lot of rehearsal situations. Like for those transatlantic shows, there are literally 40 songs,
right,
40 songs that are going to be, and he's got to be on all, pretty much all of them.
right,
And he hasn't heard any of them. And
yeah,
yes, hopefully, I've even seen him where most of the acts won't even bring charts,
yeah, right,
literally.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
um, a lot of times in that situation, you're just fighting for your life as a player. And
yeah.
the idea of, hey, we should extend this section or this, that, and the other, that's, there's not enough time
Sure,
to have done that. So a lot of those times, I don't see a lot of input
yeah,
in terms of like stopping the rehearsal and saying, hey, let's try this, that, or the other.
yeah,
No, he's like, he's a workhorse in that way. He's,
right,
as opposed to, an artist wearing a cape,
yeah,
and a cane and a top hat type of figure. He isn't that guy. He's the working mule,
right,
if you
right,
will,
right,
through. And rehearsals, what is a rehearsal?
right,
It's a working time to have a presentation of a show.
yeah,
So he isn't going to be throwing around any kind of capes or top hats.
right,
We're in the trenches here. We have,
yeah,
my God, we have a day and a half to have 40 songs prepared for a sellout, Royal Festival, seating.
right, right,
So
right,
I've he's not big on input.
sure, sure,
Uh, he's big on getting in the trenches and let's get through this project.
yeah,
And he will show up, I promise, in the
yeah.
recording and the
Oh yeah,
show.
oh yeah,
But there's no sort of esoteric stuff going on at the rehearsal.
right.
He's a worker.
So what? That was for the live portions. What were the tapings like?
The same.
Uh,
The
just I mean,
honestly, they're no different. I
yeah,
mean, if you can kind of get away that a recording and a live show is exactly the same. Actually, one has an audience and all that.
right,
One you can fix, so to speak. But in terms of the attitude, it's the same, which
yeah,
is he's we're going to perform
sure,
to this recording.
yeah,
And so in many ways they're kind of exact, even though there's obviously places they split off.
yeah.
But
Well, I mean, like, did you have a longer period for the TV version, like a longer rehearsal for those repertoire? Still
no,
like,
no, we did
okay,
not. And that's
yeah,
why, especially you have to underline the working mule of this
yeah, yeah,
aspect, because you don't have a lot of time. In
right,
fact, by contrast, we had a lot more time in the recording studios because we're only doing one song at a time.
right,
And so we're
yeah,
not preparing 40 songs. Honestly, we're preparing one song.
right,
And
right,
so that one, if we have a question about the bridge or the changes or
yeah,
the dynamics or all that, we're talking about it right then.
yeah,
But we're also not trying to beat the arrangement into the ground. And we still want things fresh and almost unfamiliar.
sure, sure,
And if you consider a jazz and not just jazz. There's plenty of bluegrassers and rockers this way too. If you consider that they're musicians who are in the moment,
Yeah.
one of the biggest aspects to me of jazz is not its vocabulary, although there's a huge vocabulary musically speaking. I see in common is the ability to have improvisation,
Mm-hmm.
like at any moment, like the next solo, or the next
Right.
solo extends into this, that, and the other. If you, to me, Danny is that ultimate musician who can read a chart, follow it, he's listening, but also if we need to extend into another area, he's already there.
Right.
He's
Right.
already there, almost waiting for us, uh, for that moment. And he's the perfect player in that way,
Sure. Sure. Sure.
because he's covering all the bases, the stuff written on the page, the listening stuff, and throw it his way, you know, and he'll do something with the moment you threw it.
Right. Right. Speaking on the transatlantic sessions themselves specifically, I was curious what you could share. Maybe some of your favorite moments of that. Like I know you were singing harmony on one of the Paul Brady pieces, if I remember right. And
Uh-huh.
I just, what was it like to have your work, interpreted by these Irish and English and
Oh,
Scottish
I was
musicians?
thrilled. I was in some of the ultimate musical circles that I've been in.
Yeah.
Those transatlantic sessions, I mean, if you just go through the house band alone, just like look a list of the names of the house band and see that the piper is one of the greatest living pipers there is. You see, you know, Ollie Bain,
Right. Right.
you see Danny Thompson, Jerry Douglas. Come on, this is silly. It's
Yeah.
very silly, and then you add the guest to it. So
Right.
if Paul is a guest and I'm there, and the whole idea is for us to do stuff together, I'm going to drag Paul out on one of my songs,
Yeah.
and then I'm in on one of his, and and then
Yeah.
there again, you work up the tune, they film it, which adds a little more complication in terms of time.
Yeah.
And then when film has done what they needed to, and musicians at the same time, we all got the right performance done. We break, eat, and go to the next song. It's one song at a time at that point.
Yeah.
And those are some of the most thrilling things I've done, was those tapings of
Sure.
transatlantic.
Well, how long was like the typical stay? Did you have like some just leisure days, warm up days that you just sat around and jammed, or was it pretty hands on from the moment you got there?
Basically, for each act, roughly speaking, you'd be there 2 to 4 days.
Mm-hmm.
And of those 2 to 4 days, probably most of it was, hands on.
Right.
And then there's another 4 acts coming in after you, so you're not hanging around on their stuff,
Yeah.
as they didn't come in early to hang out on your stuff. So someone curated, Paul and me and Tim O'Brien to
Mm-hmm.
be there at the same moment, and and they knew that something would happen in that particular gathering.
Ah,
And then
sure.
they've curated the next group too.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
and so I'd say it's probably not a 2 day thing. It's probably a 3 or 4 day thing. And
Got
then
it.
you clear out, but they
Yeah.
stay, and
Right.
then the same thing happens again, and they get probably a whole season's tapings in a 2 week period,
Wow.
roughly speaking.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Those are some of the most magical musical moments I've ever seen. I mean, just some of those collaborations and just seeing all these different artists with the house band, like you say. I mean, a lot of these people haven't played together, and seeing it for the first time is some real magic that was happening there.
Yeah, and then the shows would try to take that general premise and try to just put a stage show together
Right.
using
Right.
that same house band. So that's what I mean when I say Danny has to learn 40 tunes,
Yeah. Right. Right.
and there's no room for changing the bridge. There's no room
Yeah.
for you try to just get through, because my God, tomorrow night we're having our opening,
Right. Right.
and
Right.
there's a sound check in there too. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's a different kind of working musician that's being asked to do that. And with Danny being on pretty much everything,
Yeah.
and he's supposed to know where the notes are. He's supposed to, you know,
Yeah.
the bass player is supposed to know, you know, the bridge versus the chorus, where a drummer might be able to float along, or
Right.
even a guitar player doesn't have to play the first note.
Yeah.
I mean,
Right.
there's ways to cheat and sneak around, but a bass player kind of has to know. And by the way, Danny can be one of the sneakiest guys there,
Yeah.
you know, because
Yeah.
he hears the change, and then let's say he didn't make it, he'll find a floating way to make it all have worked out.
Right.
And
Right.
his kind of, he calls it overplaying that he does,
Uh.
but his quote overplaying gives a certain license to, when he quote makes a mistake, that he can find a way to make the mistake not so mistaken.
I haven't heard any mistakes yet. he he did it perfectly.
Right.
Yeah.
He's that kind of floating thing.
Right, right, right. Last question about Danny's. I'm curious if he, when you would be on tour, if he would play any albums in the vehicle of like his favorite things he was listening to, or if he talked about what he enjoyed listening to, you know, just casually, you know, what if you knew what some of his library was.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't on the road. When we're on the road, for some reason, we'd rather talk than
Oh, sure, sure.
listen to that, listen to
Yeah.
stuff. But now at his home, that's sort of his, he's got his office, and in there he's got his music collection.
Mm-hmm.
And do you know about his the albums that he was the leader on?
Some of them, like my favorite is this one he did with Peter Knight. It's two freeform improvisations for about an hour, and that is just absolutely unreal. I love that. I wore that thing
Right,
out. But I know that, like what you mentioned earlier, he did two albums, I think, with the Koto player, which was just magnificent, really magnificent. And then
right. Well, if you want to hear the ones where he's the leader,
uh huh.
you should look up, and that will be a big education, I think. It's called Whatever,
Ah, yeah, yeah, yeah. Right, right. Yeah,
and then his next album, follow up to that, was Whatever's Next.
right. Yeah, yeah.
And so he, you know, if you even think of the name Whatever, you see it's almost anti business, almost anti big deal.
Right,
But the
right.
music in that was his music.
Yeah,
And so on all these other things, he's an improvisational guy or part of an ensemble. But if you want to hear where his brain is,
yeah.
musically speaking, those two albums are pretty strong, because you'll see that he has almost a concert. He's got obviously a jazz leaning
Right.
composition, but he's also got almost a concert music
Yeah,
leaning.
yeah,
And you know, modern, I wouldn't call it classical, but modern leanings
yeah.
is part of what he has.
Sure.
Certainly jazz, but he also loved old blues. He loves and his biggest love might be English folk songs,
Yeah. Okay, that makes
which is
sense. Yeah.
partially what showed up in the what was it, Pentangle thing.
Right. Right. Right.
And
Right.
but he has a particular love for his culture's folk music.
Right. Right.
And that doesn't mean that he doesn't love, you know, Thelonious Monk,
Sure. Sure.
but there's a real kind of heartstrings on folk music and working people.
Yeah. Well, tell me, does Danny's Hank run deep as well?
Yeah, if you consider where Hanks runs deep, which is, I tried to show on that album, which is
Right.
blues.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes,
Absolutely.
Danny's blues runs deep, you know, because
Yeah.
in some ways that was some of his first playings.
Yeah.
Some of his it seems his greatest treasures were playing with the original, or some of the earliest blues guys from
Right.
America who would come over to England and need a pickup band.
Right.
And there's, big tall Danny Thompson at 17 or 20 or whatever old he was, playing with Josh White,
Right.
you know. And
Well, one of his first was with Roy Orbison. I thought I read. I mean,
yeah,
that's
that's
yeah.
that's right.
And
And
the
I think he
yeah.
had to play electric bass for that.
Yeah, and I remember reading he said he didn't like that, but then I thought the story was that he didn't realize who it was even. They just said, "Will you play for this?" And he said, "Sure." And then it turned out to be Roy Orbison, and it surprised. So
Yeah,
it's
yeah, that's right. And those blues guys predated though the Orbison thing.
ah, gotcha, gotcha.
Yeah, it was while in his formation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that seemed to be very, again, the authenticity.
Yeah,
Danny was responding to the authenticity,
yeah,
not that this is a Billy Big Fish.
right,
He's
right.
way more into the authenticity of something.
Sure. And again, thank you so much for your time today. I really do appreciate it, and I've learned a lot. So I thank
Yeah,
you, and I
absolutely.
hope to
Well,
see
Danny's
you.
one of my favorite human beings on planet.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
He's family.
Yeah, yeah. I love those records so much. I love them. I love them a lot.
Cool, cool.
All right, thank you. See you later. Take care.
Okay,
Yeah.
bye
Mhm.
bye.